In this project, we're going to paint this logo onto the dugout, beginning with what the customer has given me to work with, which consists of their current logo with the lettering softball, their new logo, which is taken after the Arizona flag, and it needs to match the colors of the Arizona flag, the stripes on top. The star is being replaced by the RM, and they want to keep the softball lettering. The tools that I'll be using will be a roll of 1-inch tape, a piece of sidewalk chalk, a 4-inch trim roller, and a 1/2-inch brush, a 1-inch brush, and a 2-inch brush. And this will be the end result. So, whether you use a computer or whether we use the old school method of measuring and using a T-square and a straight edge, our point is to divide the work of art into an equal grid area. So we begin by dividing the horizontal line and a vertical center line, and we make squares of equal distance on our artwork. That becomes the pattern that we will transfer to the wall. The first thing we have to do is to determine the midpoint of our canvas, the wall. And in this case, we count the bricks. We could use a tape measure, but bricks are evenly spaced. They're 16 inches wide each. And in this case, we have 9 1/2 bricks wide. So the midpoint is going to be at 4 3/4 bricks from each side of the dugout. The next step is to complete the center line top to bottom, which is going to give us a spine on which to build the rest of the logo. Once we have decided where we want the top of the logo to be, and we have determined where we want the bottom of the logo to be, which in this case is a 6-foot tall logo, we can measure to the midsection and put in our middle line, and then divide that equally into 12 inches sections this case. So we now have our horizontal lines laid out evenly spaced, and we can now begin to lay in our vertical lines, again, the same distance apart as the horizontal, which creates our complete grid pattern. After cleaning up the edges, we have a grid similar to the one with our sketch, and so we notice there are 6 units wide and 6 units high. Notice that the artwork goes completely top to bottom of the 6 units, but it does not go completely side to side. So we will start from the center vertical line and build our artwork off of the center. The angle of the artwork joins up right about 2 1/3 units from the right, and the angle up is about 1 unit from the bottom. So with that, I'll grab a point on the wall to mark 1 unit up from the bottom, and approximately 2 1/3 units from the right-hand side. Using a straight edge, I will connect my points, giving me the base angle for the bottom. The right-hand side is a straight line up and down, and now I will approximate the ragged edge on the left-hand side of the state. Consulting my sketch and then counting the number of squares from the top and the bottom, from the left and the right, I determine where each of the elements are going to go. In this case now, the R and the M of the actual logo. I rough sketch where the letters are, and then I'll clean them up shortly using the straight edge. But for now, I need to place my points where they belong, and looking back and forth at my sketch, I roughly approximate, in this case, the letter R, and now the letter M. And noting that the R and the M are split along the halfway mark horizontally. And we're just rough sketching in the letters now, putting them in the right place. And once we have them where we want them, we clean them up with a straight edge. In this case, I'm using a level. Easier to hold on to it than a thin ruler when it's up against the flat wall. Gives me something to grip. And now it's time to remove the tape from the upper half of the logo because we have to paint a white background before we can put in the yellow and red stripes. Yellow and red paint are both very transparent, and without a white background, you'll see the dark red of the building showing through. The yellow will no longer be yellow, and the red will look very muddy. Using conventional top quality exterior house paint, I just pour off enough paint to do the part of the project I need, and always clean the can afterwards because it starts to dry quickly in the sun, and you're not going to use all of it at once. The can will be open and closed many times in most projects, so you will waste a lot of paint, and if you don't get the lid to close completely at some point in time, it's likely to leak at the least appropriate moment. Now, using a 4-inch trim roller available from most Home Depots or Lowe's or any other hardware store, I begin to paint in the white background very carefully, avoiding my letter R because it's not going to need a background, using the tape as my bottom guide. Everything below the tape is going to be dark blue. Everything above the tape is going to be painted white. And then, again, I'll separate it and paint one part red and one part orange as the flag goes around. And now it's time to remove the tape from the bottom half of the logo, and we will then paint that dark blue. Carefully using the 4-inch roller to create a very straight line. Careful not to get the blue paint into the white area. Using the edge of the roller to fill in the mortar groove. Pushing the paint in with that roller. The 4-inch roller is just great when they're fresh and new for creating a nice, clean edge. And on a textured surface, such as a brick wall, it holds enough paint to push that paint down into that groove. When you need to, just turn it slightly on an angle and use the corner of the roller to fill in that groove. And this is how much we can get done with the 4-inch roller. Now we need to take a 1-inch brush with a nice flat edge and fill in the small gaps in the white area and the blue area. Too tight for the roller to reach, so we'll have to use a brush. And that will give us this effect. Now the background is complete, and we need to lay out the burst of the flag on top. So to do that, we need to determine the vanishing point where all the lines come together into one point. Referring to my drawing and my spacing, I'm figuring out where the angle of the first burst should go, right about there. Using a piece of chalk, lining up my straight edge with my vanishing point. I draw a light color across the white background. Now locating my second stripe, it should end up right about there. And the third stripe will cut in right about at that point. Count the spaces. And fourth one, fifth one, sixth one. Now we're going places. Once we have our lines laid into the proper position, it's time to add the color. So now doing the yellow on top of our white background and using a 2-inch brush, we fill in the area nice and neatly, like a child enjoying a coloring book. And that gives us our completed background. Now it's time to add the shape of the mountain, which cuts through the letter M. So for that, I'll just chalk in a rough sketch. And then we'll begin to paint the black sky behind the red mountain portion of the letter M. And that gives us this result. Now it's time to remove the tape completely, resulting in a nice clean edge. I will use a 1-inch flat bristle brush to do the white outline around the completed logo. And the final step of the logo itself is to add the white outline and the white definition trim around the letters R, M, and the top of the mountain. Just adding the 1-inch border makes that pop off there. Now, using a 1/2-inch bristle brush, we outline the thinner lines around the letters R, M, and we define the top of the mountain. Notice how I use my baby finger as the pivot point. The distance from the surface that I'm painting is determined by the length of my baby finger. And as I just brush that against the wall, or in this case I use it as my stabilizer and wiggle the rest of my hand back and forth to work the paint down into the porous surface of the brick. But the baby finger is essential for setting the standard of the width of my paint line. It steadies my hand and keeps my line consistent. It's the baby finger that sets the standard for the distance your brush will be from the surface, and it just gives you that pivot point. If you don't move your hand at all but just twist your wrist, you're going to get a nice curve. Drawing a straight line consists of using your baby finger again as setting the distance for the brush, and then work the brush back and forth carefully to get the paint worked down into those little holes in the concrete. And we get to the final finesse, the final line of the logo, and work the paint in using that baby finger to give us a nice stabilized straight line. And then we add the final touch. And that gives us this. Now it's time to add the word softball as part of the design. And so again, I have left the vertical center line in place, And so now I'm going to add the top guideline for my lettering and then determine how large I want the lettering to be. I'll add the bottom guideline for the lettering, and then we will figure out how to divide the word softball into equal distance left and right of the vertical center line. To do this, we take the printed word and we fold the first letter up against the very last letter, just like that. Press it together, and then we look for the crease. And wherever the crease lies, that is the middle of the word that you're going to paint. There it is. I begin by sketching in the second half of the word. This is important because we're going to use the second half of the word to determine how far we need to go from the center line for the first letter of the word. In this case, the second half of the word is ball, B-A-L-L. How far do these four letters go? Well, then we need to start the word soft exactly that distance to the left of center line. Making adjustments with our chalk line is relatively simple, like just using our hand to wipe it off, and we will have to wash it down with a damp cloth later because the paint does not want to stick to the chalk. This particular lettering style has little spikes added to the basic letter, which protrude up above the baseline, and some of them protrude below the baseline. And so we need to paint those in afterwards, but we need to draw them in now. Now I measure the distance the letters B-A-L-L took, and I go to the left of center line, that same distance, and start the letter S for the word S-O-F-T. That will put half the distance on the left of the center and the other half equally spaced to the right of center. Imitating the shapes of specific lettering styles requires the same artistic skills as imitating a picture or imitating the shapes and the colors of an object in front of you. So the mind has to translate what it sees into a two-dimensional form on another surface. Now, these letters are rough sketches, mostly trying to get the spacing correct and the approximate width of each letter consistent. So I'm penciling in the basic shapes that I see on the example that the customer gave me. Now, I'm going to skip over the letter F and go to the last letter, T. And I'm going to fit in my letter T first. And that way I will have the option of making my letter F as big as it needs to be to fill in the empty space. Gives me that little cushion to play with. And there we have it, the word softball equally spaced to the left and right of center line. Now we take a damp cloth and we wipe off all our smudges, cleaning up the background, and we need to create a consistent line weight of each of the letters. Looking up at the letter T is thinner than the letter S, so we're going to have to adjust that. So by using a straight edge, and in this case a level, I line up all the bottoms of the letters and make sure that the bottoms are the same thickness, B and the letter L in the top of the letter, so the S and the O and the upper bar on the letter F and T are all the same thickness. Once we have our lettering drawn in the way we want it, it's time to use that 1-inch chisel brush and start the paint. Each step of the way, we've started with a rough sketch of the end result. Then we cleaned up the rough sketch, and now we've turned it into a coloring book. Whether it was the logo itself or the lettering, the process is the same. Lay out your rough sketch, clean it up, and then it's a coloring book, and then paint it in. Take your time and do a neat and accurate job. I've obviously sped up the video here to keep it from taking too much time. Work the paint into the surface, down into the porous little holes of the brick. Take your time and work the paint down into the porous surface of the brick using the nice flat edge of the chisel brush to give you that nice clean edge and a nice angled finish like this. There you go. And there we have it. Now it's time to remove the guide tapes, and we need to add the little upper and lower details to the letters. And there we have it, the finished product in all its glory. Took me about 6 hours to lay out the grid and paint it in. I hope you find some value in this video, how to lay out a logo, how to transfer it from a piece of paper to a brick wall or a canvas or any other surface for that matter, and how to use the right equipment to get the job done. Thanks for watching. I'm Jim Gardner.